And okay, here we are. Well, my name is Andrea Pollera. I'm an English teacher who graduated from Instituto Superior Nacional de Profesorado. I hold a ESOL and TEFL certificate and a diploma in digital technologies for education from Universidad Nacional del Sur. I work as a remote teacher for my institution, share materials, online lessons, Speakadelic language school in Poland, the British Council, and Colegio bilingual school del Solar in Bahía Blanca. Since 2018, I have been organizing events that promote participation and collaboration among teachers worldwide. Our events were declared of cultural interest by the Department of Culture of the Municipality of Mar del Plata in 2018, 2019, and 2021. You will receive the info post event and the survey of satisfaction in the chat later during the event, but now it's time to introduce Jane Setter. Jane Setter is Professor of Phonetics at the University of Reading, UK, and has recently held visiting professor positions at Kof University, Japan, and the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, Hong Kong. Probably best known as co-author of the Cambridge English Pronouncing Dictionary. She is also the author of the public-facing Your Voice Speaks volumes. It's not what you say, but how you say it. Co-author of Hong Kong English and co-editor of the Cambridge Handbook of Phonetics, among others. Her research publications are mainly in speech prosody, investigating pronunciation and phonology in global Englishes, and in English in children with speech and language differences. Well, Jane, most welcome to have you today. It's a pleasure for us. So let's go. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you just to check that it works. And then when I've done that, we'll animate the slides. So it should be that one. Oh, no, hang on a minute. No, that's the wrong one. Hang on. I thought I'd picked the right one, but it doesn't.
Don't worry.
Yeah, no, hang on. I thought I'd picked the right one. That one. Okay, let's share that. That's better. Okay, so you should be able to see the PowerPoint, and I will change that to presenter view. Okay, so can you see the big thing? You can't see the presenter view thing. Okay, good. Right. That's what I want. And I'm just going to oh, actually, before I do that, I will put in the chat a link where you can download the PDF of the slides if you want them. That's interesting. It seems to have done too, but never mind. That is not important. And let's get rid of that. So I'm going to be talking about English pronunciation for a global world today. This is based on a publication that I co-created with a colleague called Robin Walker, about whom a bit more later on, and also Yi-Ling Lo. Yi-Ling Lo is professor at now, which one is she? NTU. So it's the National Technology University in Singapore. And Robin runs his own business as a pronunciation teacher, but recently retired, which means he's been putting out all sorts of interesting publications. And I'll give you a link to one of those later on. In any case, this was a position paper that was authored for Oxford University Press, and I will give you a link where you can download that at the end. In the meantime, I've given you this link already, so you can download the slides if you want to, which has all of the link information in it. And you can also just scan the QR code as well if you want to for this presentation. Okay. So I'm interested in people from all over the world being able to communicate clearly with one another through the medium of English. And this is taking into account that English really is a national language. It doesn't belong to people like me from Britain or Americans or anybody else. It belongs to everybody that speaks it in all sorts of different communities in the world. So here I've given you examples of places around the world where English is spoken, like India, for example, countries in Africa and also in Hong Kong. And as Andrea mentioned, I've authored a book on Hong Kong English as well, looking at that variety in particular. And because we have all of these different speakers, this means that there have been significant changes in the language, not just in pronunciation, also in other things like vocabulary, for example. But these speakers have had a particularly strong influence on the pronunciation of English. So that means that the English that we hear that's spoken by people around the world is more varied than ever before. And it's important to support the development of mutually intelligible varieties of English so that we can use this language effectively as a means of communication. And that's what this talk is about, and that's what the position paper is about. I've just actually been in a webinar with Mark Hancock, who is somebody that produces pronunciation teaching materials, and he was pretty much saying the same thing. So it's good to know that there's a lot of us who are keen to get this message over. So I'm going to talk about a few different things in this presentation. First of all, the importance of pronunciation in English language teaching. Also, what is good pronunciation? Moving from native likeness as a model to international intelligibility as I don't think that's a model exactly, but as a way of communicating. And also something on professional development for teachers. So some thoughts about the sorts of things that teachers need to be thinking about too. Okay, so let's start with the importance of pronunciation in English language teaching. I'm sure it's no surprise to you that I think pronunciation is important. However, it's not just important for the sake of the pronunciation, it's also something which supports other kinds of skills. So pronunciation skills have a significant contribution to make to language learning and use, not just thinking about how it's pronounced, but other areas as well. And this importance really can't be underestimated. Pronunciation has long been accepted as an essential part of something called communicative competence, which is a speaker's knowledge of a language and how to use it. And this is a concept that dates back to the 1970s and defined from the perspective of native speaker behaviours and cultures. However, the globalization of English in the 21st century has led to a broadening of this concept to reflect the use of what we're calling English as an international language. It's also sometimes called English as a lingua franca. It's a little bit different, but it's more or less the same thing. So the goal is now to develop the language knowledge and usage skills needed for communicating with people from a range of different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. So in other words, we want to develop their intercultural communicative competence. So not just the communicative competence that they might be having with Brits and Americans and Australians and so on, but a much more broad notion of communicative competence. Pronunciation can account for up to 2/3 of communication breakdown between speakers of the language. So international intelligibility is a really essential component of intercultural communicative competence, which means that the teaching of pronunciation is more relevant than it ever has been. Surveys show the majority of learners rate pronunciation as a priority. They either agree strongly or just agree in general with survey statements highlighting its importance when learning English. And because of this, we can assume that our students will be receptive to focusing on pronunciation in their lessons. A good pronunciation relates to and can boost performance in other areas of learning English. For example, speaking. Now, when I first got into this area, I found it quite interesting that speaking and pronunciation were not the same thing. But speaking is more to do with fluency. I'm sure you're aware of the 4 skills: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So speaking pronunciation plays a part in that, but it's more to do with fluency and accuracy. I guess that's the pronunciation part. Research indicates that deliberate pronunciation training improves students' confidence when speaking English. And this is significant because we know from other research that students who are less sure about their pronunciation competence are less willing to participate in speaking tasks and find it more of a challenge. In addition, teachers all over the world have first-hand experience of how poor pronunciation can seriously impact a learner's self-confidence. So that might be difficulty that learners experience in pronouncing words, and also the perception that their spoken English is poorly intelligible to their listeners. Teachers can support learners in becoming clearer, more confident speakers through simple classroom activities such as teaching them how to check the pronunciation of new vocabulary prior to speaking, helping them with sounds they find hard to articulate, and showing them how to link words so as to increase fluency. So there's all sorts of different pronunciation techniques that can help to improve fluency among our speakers. What about listening? This is sometimes seen as a kind of a flip side of pronunciation, that we need to think about listening in these terms. Actually, communicative approaches to listening traditionally focus on the application of top-down processing, such as using contextual clues to understand spoken English. And of course, we need to help our learners to do this, to be able to use contextual clues to understand what's going on around them. But it can be quite challenging for our learners in the initial stages, at least. So more recently, experts in teaching English as a foreign language listening have agreed that more attention needs to be paid to bottom-up processing, which involves decoding smaller units, so individual phrases, words, and sounds that the learners hear. This is especially important for lower level learners, because these learners are often unable to make use of either contextual clues or prior knowledge to fill in the gaps in their understanding. Listeners first need to break the continuous sound of spoken English down into meaningful units, short phrases, or individual words, and then quickly and accurately recognize words or, if necessary, individual sounds. I strongly recommend that pronunciation teaching should reintroduce the ear training and sound discrimination exercises that were widely discredited with the arrival of communicative language teaching. But that doesn't mean we should get rid of the top-down view altogether. I'm not saying that, but we need both. We need to be able to work from both sides and come together so that we've got something that supports our learners. Pronunciation also overlaps with listening in terms of understanding that changes to words that speakers make in connected speech also take place. So we get modifications to the dictionary form of a word through processes like assimilation, elision, or R liaison. So those sorts of processes that happen. Now, it may not be necessary to teach this, to teach learners to do this, but certainly we need to teach our learners to be able to perceive it when it happens and be able to understand what's going on. These effects are most noticeable when speech is rapid and spontaneous. Listeners who are unaware of them will face serious obstacles in their attempts to understand natural speed native speaker English. But, you know, they might not always be coming into contact with native speakers, and that's something that we also need to take into account. So this focus on connected speech for listening is appropriate for intermediate and higher level learners who have a better understanding of the bottom-up stuff and therefore can take this kind of thing into account. I'm really sorry if you can hear my cat yowling her head off. She's marching around the house screaming at me for some reason. I'm not sure why. Anyway, food is down. I don't know what she wants. Let's move on. Also, vocabulary learning. Students need guidance in the correct pronunciation of new vocabulary at the time it's introduced. This helps them to avoid applying their first language sound to spelling norms to English words that they're learning. For example, this is an example from Spanish, because this is where the main author for the position paper is based. Robin Walker is based in Spain. So he was giving the example of this word spelled R-E-A-L. The English pronunciation for this is real, but Spanish speakers are likely to say real, for example, if they don't know the word or don't know the pronunciation of it in English. And this can be confusing for other speakers of English who know the word differently. If you import your first language phonology onto that in a way that overlaps too much, it can become confusing. It's really windy today. I'm surprised if my house doesn't get blown away. It's that windy. I can hear the gusts of wind behind me. So we need to take this kind of thing into account as well. Evidence from neurolinguistics demonstrates the importance of good English pronunciation for the retention of second language vocabulary as well, when people are learning vocabulary words. Words that we meet are initially processed in working memory using something called the phonological loop. This consists of an inner ear and an inner voice which hold and repeat verbal information so that it can be transferred successfully from working memory to long-term memory. Most researchers now agree that good pronunciation assists the phonological loop in successfully preparing new vocabulary for storage in long-term memory, from where it can later be retrieved for use. So understanding what the pronunciation is of a word at the time you're learning it is useful for all sorts of reasons, not just pronouncing the word itself, but also for storing words in the memory and then being able to use those words effectively in communicative settings. And finally, reading. Now, we all know that English spelling doesn't match the pronunciation very much. There are all sorts of historical reasons for that. If you know anything about English, you'll know that it's a language that was developed from a kind of Germanic language originally, and then we were invaded by the French, and we also have Latin in there. And then sometime in, I think it was the 17th century, 17th or 18th century, there was this big change in a whole load of vowels. There was also the Renaissance, which meant that all kinds of letters that weren't originally in words were put into words by analogy with Latin. So we've had a lot of influence on the spelling of English. But in fact, what we know is that from a reading point of view, it can be helpful to have a good handle on pronunciation. For beginners who are learning to read in English, pronunciation is not an optional extra because of the way the written forms of English words are processed in working memory. Both first and second language reading involves decoding written words by accurately and fluently matching sounds to the letters or the letter combinations on the page. So, knowing the correct pronunciation contributes positively to word reading fluency and more general to overall reading fluency. And it can also help people to understand what those tricky patterns are if you can get used to them. Research into reading in English as a second language concludes that the reading problems experienced by some learners are actually the result of poor pronunciation of the sounds of English. So assisting these readers to improve their pronunciation could therefore help them to read better. So pronunciation, not a discrete skill, it's something that affects other areas of language learning, and that is another reason for why it's very important. This is a quote from Ealing that's in the position paper talking about the importance of pronunciation, teaching and learning. She says, we can sow the seeds of our learners' success in their English studies and in their future careers if we work on pronunciation, teaching and learning. And this is evidently something that we want for our students. We want them to be successful, and pronunciation is something that can really contribute to that. I'm just kind of rambling on here. I know that there is various noises going on. If there is anything that I need to know about in the chat, you will let me know, won't you, Andrea? Okay, so let's move on to what is good pronunciation? It's a good question, isn't it? I remember going to a conference once in a Central European country, and I was giving a presentation on pronunciation teaching. I'd just co-written an article with Jennifer Jenkins on pronunciation, and I was talking about the lingua franca core, which will come up later on, and about intelligibility. And I gave the presentation, and everyone was very polite and applauded. And at the end of the conference, the organisers came up to me and said, we'd like you to say something to close the conference. And I said, oh, okay, thank you. You didn't actually tell me you wanted me to do this. So what do you want me to say? And they said, we don't mind what you say. We just want to listen to your beautiful English, which on the one hand is a very nice thing to hear, but on the other hand is an interesting thing to hear, considering I'd just given a talk on intelligibility and how it's not necessary to have a native-like pronunciation. So when we think about what good pronunciation is, it really is something that means different things to different people. And this is the kind of place that we're trying to really enact a shift. Good pronunciation may vary across speakers. It's not something that is necessarily going to be the same from one speaker to another. Something else that we know is that a speaker's intelligibility is not affected by a non-native accent. These are two separate issues. If I can use the term non-native, I know it's a disputed term. I'm using it as a kind of shorthand, native speaker and non-native speaker, but you know, I realize that there are issues with the terms. So learners can be highly intelligible and retain a non-native speaker accent. This is something that research has shown. It's not necessarily the case that a speaker's accent is going to affect how easy they are to understand and comprehend. So what we're really going for is something that we refer to in the paper as comfortable intelligibility. Researchers and international guidelines for language teaching concur that for learners of English, good pronunciation is what successfully contributes to effective and efficient communication in a given setting. So being understood in a language is much more important for international communication in a global world than sounding like a particular native speaker. That doesn't mean that learners shouldn't try to sound like native speakers if that's what they want, but it's our job as teacher educators to make sure that the learners are able to be understood first before we say they have to have a particular sort of accent. So what we're looking for is something that's comfortably intelligible to the listener, whether that listener is a native speaker or a non-native speaker. That's what we are after. And also we're looking for the ability to change the way you speak, modify the way you speak, and for the listener to be prepared to try to understand you. And we call those things accommodation, productive and receptive accommodation. Comfortable intelligibility is listener oriented in that it involves productive accommodation to both the listener and the context on the part of the speaker. In the paradigm of English as an international language, no single accent of English, native speaker or non-native speaker, standard or otherwise, automatically represents good pronunciation. What we're interested in is pronunciation that is clear and that the listener is able to understand your message. This is a diagram taken from the position paper. And you can see that we have at the top there limited international intelligibility, high international intelligibility, and then we've got the learner's personal pronunciation goals. And we would prefer this to be motivated by the learner and not by some country's syllabus that insists that everybody sounds like an American or a Brit, for example. But we realise that there's politics going on with language policy, so that's not necessarily anything we can do anything about, but we can try our best to make the point. So if something is very strongly influenced by a learner's first language, then they're unlikely to be intelligible from an international perspective. And that would be the limited international intelligibility. So the thing that we think that teachers should be focusing on is high international intelligibility. So enabling our learners to be intelligible to a wide range of listeners from around the world. And where it says EIL competence, that is English as an international language. So competence in English as an international language. And that says LFC based, and LFC is Jennifer Jenkins Lingua Franca Core. In the next column, you can see we've got learners' personal pronunciation goals. So this could be a standard type native speaker accent, or it could be any chosen accent, or it could be minimal first language transfer. So learners will have their own goals for these things, and we would prefer that to be learner driven rather than language policy driven, let's say, but we know that we have potentially an upward battle on that because of the way that language policy is constructed. We're living in an extremely linguistically diverse Anglophone world, and in this world, native-like accents are becoming less important to learners. They're not so relevant. It's assumed by many that native speaker teachers are the best kind for various reasons. And if you know the work of Henry Widdowson, he refers to this as the native speaker fallacy, because if you're a native speaker, it doesn't necessarily mean you know anything about how you use the language, because we're not really taught that. You learn most about a language from having to learn it consciously. And the languages that we learn as a child, we don't learn them consciously, or at least not in the same sort of way. We sort of pick them up through exposure and so on. That doesn't mean we can't learn things about it, but to assume that any native speaker is the best teacher is really ridiculous, as far as most people are concerned who've done any research on this. Just because someone speaks a language fluently and has this implicit knowledge, it doesn't mean they have the explicit knowledge and can explain it, or that they're able to teach it. It's also quite likely that monolingual native speakers have little or no linguistic or cultural understanding of the learners that they're teaching. And these are really important elements. They might also not be a particularly good example of somebody who's intelligible in international English. And I'm sure that you have heard or seen, maybe on television or in movies or on news reports, you've heard people speak English who are from the UK or from Australia or from the US, and you have not understood them for various reasons. So we have to stop making this kind of assumption. That doesn't mean that they can't be good teachers, but we have to recognize that people who are non-native teachers actually bring a whole range of experience and so on to the classroom. And if you are a non-native speaker teacher from that particular language group, then you'll have all the cultural background going on as well. So you know the learner's first language and you know what sort of problems may arise because of it. And I would strongly recommend that you get to know the phonology of the language, of the first language of the learners that you have, if at all possible, because that is a real eye-opener. It really isn't possible to overemphasize the important qualities a non-native speaker teacher brings to the learning environment. I really can't say this enough. So we don't want people who are non-native speaker teachers to think they're in any way inferior to native speaker teachers. This is completely rubbish and not where we're coming from at all. It's also worth noting that the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, I normally just call this the KEFA, but anyway, has changed the way it is looking at pronunciation recently. And here's a quote from 2018, where they are saying that in language teaching, the phonological control of an idealized native speaker has traditionally been seen as the target, with the accent being seen as a marker of poor phonological control. The focus on accent and on accuracy instead of on intelligibility has been detrimental to the development of the teaching of pronunciation. And I'm just going to highlight that by underlining it. So the KEFA is understanding now that intelligibility is more important than accuracy and closeness to native norms. And that is really, really important. That's a really important step. Every speaker of English is entitled to an English-speaking identity, and this shouldn't be subject to judgment, stereotyping, or criticism by speakers of older varieties. What should be important is the ability to communicate clearly, to be intelligible. And all speakers need to learn to be intelligible in international contexts. And that means people from native speaker backgrounds as well need to think about this when they're speaking English and take that into account. So we're really looking at a paradigm shift here from native likeness to international intelligibility. And as I've said many times in this presentation, we're moving from native likeness as a goal to English pronunciation for international intelligibility. And we need pronunciation teaching to reflect that. It provides learners with an attainable goal. It respects their right to show their identity. It allows them to pursue a native speaker accent if they choose. So, what are the key aspects of teaching international intelligibility? We take as our lead the Lingua Franca Core by Jenkins. And if you download the position paper, which I will give you a link to at the end of this, you can see a reference for the Jenkins textbook. It's the pronunciation of English, no, the phonology of English as an international language. So this is probably the best known Lingua Franca Core model for intelligibility. So what does it include? In brief, it includes most consonant sounds. It also includes aspiration of voiceless plosive consonants at the beginnings of words. So those things are included. It includes consonant clusters, so ensuring that speakers are producing clusters, or at minimum producing all the consonants in the cluster. It also involves vowel length. So Jenkins discovered in her research that vowel length was more important than vowel quality. And it includes word stress to some extent. This is not really highlighted in the book, but it's something that comes over later on. And also nuclear stress or sentence focus. This is also called tonicity, so where you place your focus in the sentence. So for example, the blue one, not the red one, where we're contrasting the color, and that's the important information in the sentence. If you say the blue one, not the red one, then the listener is focusing on the one part and might be looking for a number one figure, for example. So the blue one, not the red one. We need to make sure that we are placing our nucleus in the place that has the most informational content for the listener. Also, chunking, this is also known as tonality. This is dividing the stream of speech into meaningful units. And meaningful units are going to be the sentence, the clause, the phrase, or the word, generally speaking. So we find that chunks revolve around grammatical units. And if speakers are breaking up their speech in such a way that it does not conform to grammatical units, then it can be very difficult for listeners to understand it. I'm sure you've had the experience of giving students something to read out, and instead of working on the grammaticality of it, they've sort of read to the end of the page and then taken a breath and then gone on to the next thing and so on. They've done that, and that's not chunking it in a way that's helping it to be easily understood by the listener. So that's something we need to get our learners to think about. Other areas include exposing learners to a variety of different accents, and this is receptive competence. So in the past, a great deal of pronunciation and listening practice was restricted to a small number of native speaker accents. Now, in materials, we're hearing a much wider range of accents used in listening practice. And in the future, learners will need opportunities to hear an even greater variety of native speaker and non-native speaker accents. Pronunciation practice activities will also have to offer explicit guidance in the ways that different accents of English affect what listeners might hear. So, for example, if you know that the person you're listening to regularly pronounces a w sound as a v sound, for example, pronouncing the word well as vel, then it's easier to adjust your listening to that speaker if you're aware that that's something that they're doing. We also want to help them develop accommodation skills. So we need specifically designed classroom activities that can allow learners to hear, analyze, and compare key features among a variety of accents. For instance, learners could listen to how different speakers deal with a specific pronunciation issue, such as words spelt with a TH in this, those, or then, and so on, and comment on what they've heard, and even on which pronunciation they prefer. So we're looking for guided exposure that helps learners improve their ability to understand each other's accents, and that is receptive accommodation. And this in turn facilitates international intelligibility, helps learners to see accent as a natural phenomenon, and increases their openness towards diversity, which is something we really want. So we really are interested in looking at this language from a global perspective and saying that we can't just work with native speaker norms. We need to be thinking about how English is used and the fact that it's used all over the world. And taking intelligibility into account rather than native likeness has benefits in this respect. It also releases teachers from the need to cover. Oh, sorry, somebody's beeping. Something very strange going on outside. Something very strange going on outside. Oh, I know what it is. I don't know if you can hear that. So we have a kind of Christmas parade of the lorries through the village, and I think that's what it is. Anyway, never mind. getting back to pronunciation, if we're looking at international intelligibility, it releases teachers from the need to cover aspects of pronunciation which have not been shown to contribute to international intelligibility. For example, worrying about TH sounds. I really hope that beeping isn't too loud. It's quite loud in here. Okay, let's move on to professional development for teachers, if the slides are going to go in there. So we're if English is operating as the dominant language of global communication, then the goals of pronunciation, teaching and learning have shifted, and we need to be able to support our teachers, support you guys to be able to work with that. So what sort of professional development are we thinking of, and why are we looking at this? One of the issues that comes up time and again among teachers is the lack of opportunity to acquire knowledge and skills. Teachers often report they've not had the opportunity to acquire the relevant knowledge, that they're not taught about this in teacher training programs, and that this doesn't help them with their pronunciation. My boy, this really is very loud. I feel like I have a musical accompaniment to what I'm saying. In addition, many English teachers are anxious about the perceived adequacy of their own accent. Non-native and native speaker teachers often feel this way, interestingly. This lack of confidence is a result of the emphasis that was previously placed on a native speaker accent as the ultimate goal of pronunciation practice. And we're thinking about accents like received pronunciation or general American, those sorts of things. And although surveys of learners indicate a shift towards international intelligibility should be the perceived goal, this may not be reflected in the goals that non-native speaker English teachers set themselves. Their role as models of English for their students may still push them towards pursuing a native speaker accent, even if they are aware of English as an international language and the emphasis on intelligibility. Although, interestingly, studies show that learners place less importance on the native speaker quality of their teachers' accents than the teachers do. It's really interesting, isn't it? So if we're going to think about professional development for teachers, what sort of things are we saying that teachers need? If teachers are perceiving a need for this, then this development would include the following things: a good understanding of the implications of the globalization of English, an increased understanding of the phonetics and phonology of both English and the learner's first languages. And I really can't overemphasize the importance of this. It must be overemphasized to the nth degree, because if you know about your learner's first language phonology, it can help you work out where a lot of the pressure points are going to be when trying to teach pronunciation, what sort of problems they're going to have, because all languages' phonologies differ, and this can have an effect on the ability to produce different sounds in different positions in a syllable, for example, and that's something that teachers don't often realize. So this can really be very helpful. Also, a working knowledge of how transfer from the learner's first language can be both an obstacle, but also a resource. It's often the sounds which are new in the second language which are less difficult to learn or acquire. Similar sounds can be more of a problem, particularly where there are patterns arising from allophonic patterns in the first language. So palatalized variants occurring before front vowels. For example, in Japanese, which has 5 vowels, a, I, u, e, o, we see that there are groups depending on the consonant, and the consonant that has the s sound in it, that group goes sa, shi, su, se, so, which means that shi means that Japanese speakers have difficulty saying si, because in Japanese there is no si, there's only si. So there's a difficulty of distinguishing between those things. So knowing those kinds of things can be really helpful, understanding why they arise. Also, an awareness of how pronunciation is acquired in second language and the effects of factors like age, aptitude, first language phonology, learner motivation, and practical knowledge. These sorts of things are important to know about. A working knowledge of tips and techniques for effective classroom teaching. I know there's a lot of that goes on sharing materials. If you're interested in pronunciation, then I strongly recommend you consider joining IATEFL and the Pronunciation Special Interest Group, which is very active in terms of providing support for teachers. So I would recommend that. And access to a bank of reliable teaching resources, including practical activities, apps and websites. This is something that teachers can start to build up for themselves and then share among each other. And also access to different varieties of world Englishes through online databases of speech corpora. There's actually quite a lot of databases of speech corpora out there. You could just look for them, search for them on the internet, and you'll be able to find them, and you can use this material. You can also use things like Youglish, which you may be aware of, which is a kind of YouTube English thing. If you look for Youglish and activate it and then put a word in, then you get lots of clips with different people saying the word or the phrase, which is quite a good resource. And here's a quote from Robin, who emphasizes the importance of investing in teacher development in the teaching of pronunciation, because we want you guys to have the skills, have the knowledge, and also the confidence to be able to address this particular area. So if you understand English pronunciation and the concept of international intelligibility, then you'll be much better equipped to prepare candidates efficiently and effectively for external examinations, which now evaluate pronunciation in terms of intelligibility rather than native speaker accent, although that can depend on who's doing the evaluation. So in summary, and it looks like I may not have managed to speak for an hour, but I'm sure that's not going to be a problem. The main pronunciation goal for the English learner today, as far as we are concerned, the authors of the position paper, is international intelligibility. It is not a specific native speaker variety. However, learners can choose to work towards a native speaker model if they want to. So we're not saying no native speaker models at all. We're just saying that as teachers, we need to make sure that our learners are understood in a variety of international contexts. And that does not necessarily mean sounding like me, for example. Also, it's not necessary to be a native speaker to teach teach and assess pronunciation effectively. That really is not needed. We need teachers to be aware of the skills and knowledge that they bring to this and to equip themselves with the skills and knowledge they need to teach it. Pronunciation teaching and learning can support the development of other skills, which underlines how important it is. And also, teacher training and education in pronunciation teaching and learning is vital. And we want you to make sure that if you have any opportunity to do workshops specifically on teaching pronunciation, that you take advantage of those. Okay, so the position paper, you can download it from here. So it's oup.com/ELT/expert/pronunciation, or you can scan the QR code there. I can put the link in the chat a bit later on if you would like to access it from there. You do have to put some information about yourself in, but this is a free download, so you could get a copy of the paper. OUP just wants to know where it's going. I think they are hopeful that it will have a very wide distribution. So that is the position paper that this talk is based on. There's a lot more in the paper than just what I've spoken about. So it really is worth getting hold of that and having a look through it if you're interested in pronunciation, teaching and learning. Also, my co-author, Robin Walker, has co-authored a book for teachers called Teaching English Pronunciation for a Global World. This is new, out this year. He's co-authored it with Gemma Archer, who is one of the coordinators of the pronunciation special interest group of IATEFL. This is not free, but if you're interested in having a look at the details of that book, you can scan the QR code or you can follow the link. And as I said, I'll put the links in the chat in a moment when I stop sharing the slides. So that is basically it from me. I guess it's over to you now to ask me if you have any questions, and I'm going to end the show and stop sharing, and I'll put those links in the chat. Let's do that now while we think about it. Okay, right.
Well, Jane, thank you very much for this presentation. Our pleasure, as usual, to listen to you with so many tips for teachers, also tips for students. I think that what you told us, it's a very good motivation for students from who are not native, and they try to sound like, and they feel frustrated if they do not sound in that way. Some of my students are here today, so well, I really appreciate your talk. And well, you can open your cameras, you can open your mics and ask Jane any question you would like to ask her. Ivana, Esteban, Sabri, or any of you?
Well, I do have a question. So, I mean, in our busy schedules, in all the things that we need to teach in our lessons, like sometimes there are so many things that we need to teach, like how to include pronunciation bits or pronunciation work in the classroom. And I have a second question, like how can we better expose low-level learners to the phonetic transcription of certain words or connected speech? Like how can we help them become more familiar with that?
Okay. Well, I mean, integrating pronunciation, I know there are so many competing things that teachers need to cover when they're teaching a language, but it's actually possible to integrate pronunciation teaching in. One of the recommendations that we make in the paper, for example, is that you do this when you teach new vocabulary, that you teach the pronunciation at the same time. Things like games are always good fun, little warm-up activities. You can often do pronunciation games. My colleague Mark Hancock, I was just in a webinar with him, listening to him at 3 o'clock, has produced a book many years ago now called Pronunciation Games with all sorts of photocopiable resources. Martin Hewings also produced a book with lots of little activities, pronunciation practice activities, I think it's called. So, you know, warm-up activities that involve pronunciation are often quite a lot of fun, but making sure that you teach the pronunciation with the vocabulary is useful. And also, you know, just getting people to listen to each other and work out how to modify the way that they're speaking so that they can understand each other, and to not be afraid of that and not be afraid to ask for that if they don't understand. So this is the whole accommodation skills thing. I mean, you know, sometimes it's a matter of rephrasing something rather than trying to pronounce it differently. So that sort of thing can help too. So from the point of view of phonetic transcription, it's really difficult to know if it's a good idea to teach it or not. I think that the most difficult part in English is vowels, because in my accent, there are 20 different vowel sounds. And, you know, we've got 5 vowel letters that we're trying to cope with. And so being able to read and understand all of those vowels, it can be quite a challenge. I think you can do it bit by bit, incrementally. That's possible. So you could just focus on words that had this particular symbol in it. There are lots of resources that can support people to learn symbols if you want to do that. A lot of my colleagues don't think you should necessarily be doing that. but you have to decide what works best for you and how you think this is going to support your learners, I guess. So, but out in the real world, are learners going to be using the symbols? It's difficult to know. I mean, these days, even if you look something up in a dictionary online, you can hear a word spoken. You don't necessarily have to grapple with the transcription. So I think you really need to decide if you think it's useful. If you're going to be teaching it, then I think you need to learn. You need to learn the symbols and have an understanding of how they work. But from the point of view of learners, I think it's up to you to make a decision about when you think is the best time to introduce symbols. You've got your hand up there, Esteban. You've got another question.
Yes, I'm not sure if am I allowed to ask another question?
Yes, of course.
Not sure about time.
You are.
Okay.
No one else has a hand up, so go ahead.
Okay. So, well, in the past, I have used the transcription for certain words, but lately, I mean, I've seen my students confused. So I teach Spanish-speaking learners. So I'm a Spanish speaker, so I know the ins and outs of my language. So what I've been doing is like I try to write not the phonetic transcription, but the way it would be pronounced. Like maybe students can draw from what they already know from Spanish, like something similar in English. But I don't know if it's a bad practice or
No, I don't think it is. I mean, you're the teacher. You have to decide what you think works best for your learners. And if you think that's a way that helps them to understand how the sounds work, then go ahead and do it that way. I don't think it's reasonable to criticize practice, particularly if you find it works. Do you find that it works?
Yes, I mean, students, they benefit from it. Like it helps them maybe visually understand like how the word is pronounced.
Yeah. So
it works.
there you go. It works. Go ahead, keep doing it. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There's something in the chat, Andrea, about can you send the links to my email? I don't think I'm in charge of that, but
yes, link to the slides. I already sent to the chat. I will include all these links. I sent this presentation with all the relevant links. I will include these links and I will send them to the participants. So don't worry.
Okay.
On this post event info, they have your Instagram account if they want to tag you in a story. Also, another link in order to leave us an opinion, and also the link to the certificate where it is your certificate as well, Jane, and to the material that you sent. You sent us today. I already uploaded it to this folder. So the only thing that is ahead, if there are no more questions, is that you can complete the satisfaction survey in order to have your certificate as well later. And well, any other questions? I will copy all these links. I will open them.
I can see Ivana has said that I believe there should be a friendly, practical and short phonetics book for learners of English of different levels.
Great.
I'm actually planning to write something next year. I'm not sure when it will be out. It's supposed to be very basic. It's not necessarily aimed at learners, but I think learners of English. But I think possibly it could be useful. So we'll see. But most phonetics textbooks are quite complicated. The one that I like, thank you, Yvonne, I'm glad you like pronunciation teaching. I love it too. I think the one that I use, and this is for learning phonetics, it's not for learning teaching. I still use Peter Roach's book, English Phonetics and Phonology. That's the one that I use with my MA students and my undergraduates, but that's teacher education. It's not training. So that's, teaching people to transcribe, and mostly the reason that we do that is because we're teaching people linguistic skills so that they can use those. down the line. And for me, it's all about teaching people to be able to listen very closely, because that's something that we need to do in whatever field we're in. If we're in linguistics of any kind, and in applied linguistics, it's really important to be able to listen closely, and then you can listen closely to your learners and see what they're doing and understand what the issues are. So that's what I train them to do. But yes, I'm working on something like that, which may or may not help when it's out. Ivana, you need to have a look out for it and see if you think it would be useful.
No,
Roach's textbook helps to teach transcribing. It's got lots of recorded stuff. I mean, that there are other books that do this, but I think actually when Peter wrote the book, he was teaching Spanish learners of English, actually. So he wrote it with non-native speakers in mind. And I think that's, I mean, there are lots and lots of phonetics books out there, and it's the only one that I'll use to train my students to do that kind of work. So it's I think it's a good one, although there's lots of other resources, and there's all sorts of resources online as well. The titles, okay, so it's
the title.
I'll just put it in.
Well,
it's not a new one. English phonetics and phonology, a practical course.
Open your camera if you'd like to, so after we can take a peek while Jane give us the names.
So that's the book that I was just talking about anyway.
What I always tell my students, Jane, is not to focus on the symbol, but on the sound. So I always ask them to associate different our sounds to the sounds that we have in English. And I love teaching phonology in my lessons, and I'm always correcting them pronunciation. Well, some of my students can tell you that I'm not lying. They really improve their pronunciation. I do not give them a specific activity, but I'm always correcting them pronunciation. So I come back to what I already learned, and we revise that, and I start asking them, okay, well, but remember, if the verb ends in a T and we have an ED, so all those students are those who correct their classmates, and it really works for me. That's another.
Yeah.
And of course, I also do what Esteban does with his Spanish students. Some of my adults ask me, okay, well, I'm going to write it as Armando's pronunciation. So Armando is his name. So he writes it in the way that he perceives that sound. So that is also useful for them.
Yeah, and one of the things that seems to help learners is it's something that's known as noticing. So being able to draw learners' attentions to things that they can actually hear the difference and notice the difference. And that is something that, you know, you work on in teaching and teaching these sorts of skills. I mean, noticing something that is important across all kinds of areas of language learning. It's not just something that's important for pronunciation, but if people can understand what a difference is and notice a difference, and that's where consciously picking people up on their pronunciation, where you have kind of periods of time where you might say, right, we're going to do this now, so that you're actually listening and being corrected every time, then that can help people to notice. Doesn't always work with everybody, but yes, it's definitely a technique for that. I can see that Sabri has a hand up.
And there are also some comments here in the chat. Did you take the group? This was Esteban. No, we are going to take the pic in a while. I always give my pupils other examples of words that are pronounced in the same way. Learners should associate and repeat several times. They should listen to native speakers. Hello. Okay, Sabri, open your mic and ask. Go ahead. Sabri? Maybe she picked her hand up. Okay, there you are.
Oh,
You are mute. You are mute. No? You cannot speak? You can write in the chat. Ah, now yes. No, we can.
no, we still can't hear you.
Yes, we
What
cannot
setting is your
listen to you.
microphone on?
Maybe your mic is not. Do you want to send me an audio through WhatsApp and I can play it here? You can send me an audio and I can ask Jane. Don't worry. In the meantime, I invite you all to turn on your camera so we can take a peek with Jane. I can play your audio here on my computer, Sabri, so as to ask Jane what you would like to know. Nobody's going to turn on the camera, come on. As when we are in class. Come on, Julie, Nicole, Edith, another teacher. Don't be shy.
Really
Don't be
shy
shy, my
people.
students. Who are there? Nicole, welcome, Julie. Thanks for coming today. Nicole, Juliet, Laura. Samara, she's a teacher from Brazil. And I think that Amy is QCOM-BTD because she is with a cough, she's ill. She's another teacher from Argentina, Emilce. And well, Esteban and Edith, most welcome. Okay, well, let's take a peek with those who are with their cameras on. Great. Sabri is sending me an audio, so if you have some more minutes, I will play it here in Zoom so you can answer her question before we leave. It was a real pleasure, as I told you, Jane, to listen to you because, well, now the paradigm has changed and lingua franca is the global language. But when I am 51, when I was a student of English in a bilingual school, we were like drilled that we need to speak. I love British variety, but that we need to speak in a British variety. So it is really frustrating for us as Spanish speakers not to reach our aim. So this of lingua franca standard variety is very well. I always tell my students that they need to find their own variety. It doesn't matter where they are, where they are from, but they need to find their flow and their own variety in order to relax. And as Jason Levine says, relax, repeat, remember and find your flow. I think that, well, what you said is very important. Sabri, did you send me the message, the question? Yes, there it is. Let me see if I open it here in WhatsApp and ask Jane your question. Sabri. Let's see.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't unmute my mic.
Can you listen to it, Jane, or not?
It's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to hear it.
Do you want me to send it by WhatsApp?
Okay.
It's better for you to maybe to listen to it and you can answer it.
Okay.
Let's see what Jane's tell us about that.
Right, I'll just put myself on mute for a minute while I'm doing this.
Yes,
Okay?
of course. Don't fall asleep, please.
Okay, so Sabri was asking about allophonic transcription. This is so Roach doesn't go into this in a lot of detail. If you want allophonic transcription, then you really need to seek out other textbooks. I mean, there's a range of textbooks. It's difficult for me to recommend particular ones because there are just so many that deal with this. I do think it might be worth looking at anything by Patricia Ashby, however. I'll just put her name in the chat. She's written a couple of books that, I mean, that she's British, so it's based on British English, but she goes into allophonic transcription if you're interested in that kind of thing. We used to do IPA. We have a summer course in English phonetics that runs at UCL, and we used to do an IPA strand on that, but we don't do that anymore, sadly. We don't have enough people that want to do it, where we go into that sort of stuff. So, but do have a look at Patricia's book. She's written a couple of books that you might find particularly useful. I'm not sure how useful they would be for learners because they're quite detailed. So it's the kind of thing that they would need to have a good understanding of basic transcription before you can start teaching them about the allophonic stuff. So as far as I'm concerned, I think it's more useful for teachers to understand that and then to work out how would be, for teacher training, and then to work out how they can explain that information to learners rather than using very technical books. But have a look at Patricia's books, because I think I can't remember what the titles of them are, but she's written a couple of different ones, so they're definitely worth a look at those. She has a very clear way of explaining things, which I think you might find useful. And I think the other thing was about using symbols to teach learners. I mean, I think I've really covered this. I don't have anything more to say than what I said to Esteban earlier, really, which is you have to decide if that's useful or not for your learners, because some learners find it quite, I want to use the word mind-boggling, which is sort of crazy-making to have all of these additional extra symbols. So, you know, you'd need to work out how you could introduce them in a way that was going to make sense to the learner. And I think probably you'd need to sort of focus on individual sounds and work that way if you were going to do it. There's lots of online material that does this. There's YouTube channels that talk about specific sounds and all of that. Maybe I should start a YouTube channel. Oh, I have actually got a YouTube channel, but it doesn't have this kind of stuff on it. But yeah, there's certainly material out there. So it's a matter of finding what works best for your students, I think. So yeah, thank you. For teachers, I'd have a look at have a look at Patricia Ashby's book, because she's I'm trying to think about what it's called. Let me just see if I can find her on Google while we're looking at that, because I quite like the way that she let me see, Patricia Ashby. Okay, so she's done one called let me just send, I'm going to send you the link to Amazon. I know it's a bit kind of naughty, but I guess that's easier than anything else. So I'll put a couple of links in the chat. So this one is called Speech Sounds, and that's a workbook. So she gives exercises, and then you it sounds like the lorries are back. And the other one that she wrote recently was Understanding Phonetics, and I think she's done another edition of that one. Okay, so that's right. These are the amazon.co.uk ones, so you can see what the books are. and then make a decision about whether you think they'd be useful. But I just find the way that she writes is very clear, and the exercises are very well thought out. And like me, she has a national award for teaching at university. So to get one of those, you've got to be a really excellent teacher. So these are books from somebody who's a really excellent teacher. I'm not sure if there's just anything else. I think it's just those two in particular are the best ones. I think I can't see anything else by her, but worth having a look at those. And the workbook is good. I've used that with students before, and they found it very good. Lots of exercises. So this kind of thing would be useful for teacher education, I think, based on British English. So now, have I just sent you those as a direct? I've sent you those as a direct message, haven't I? Sorry. Let's see if I can get them to.
Okay.
I'll send them to everybody. Give me a moment. I've sent them to Samara as a direct message, which wasn't what I meant to do.
Don't worry. There it is. Okay, well, perfect. Here we have the details of her book, Speech Sounds. Okay, great.
Yeah, there's two. One's called Speech Sounds, and the other one's called Introducing Phonetics, I think. But those are Patricia's books, and the Speech Sounds one is the workbook that's particularly good. The Introducing Phonetics is a bit more detailed, but it's you can have a look at both of those and see what you think. But that's the co.uk Amazon site, so you'd need to see what was in your region.
Yes, of course. Okay, dear Jane, well, I told you this already. Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you all for coming, my students, my colleagues from Argentina, from Colombia as well. And well, it's been a pleasure to have you here for our Born to Inspire 3, our closing events in sharing materials. So well, thank you very much, all of you, for coming today. See you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Jane. Bye.
Thank you for coming.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 It would be great to continue speaking, but I have a class in 10 more minutes and you need to rest as well. Jane, thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you very much. Our pleasure.